Well, hello, and Robert Kramer here with Kramer ERP with my good fellow peer and friend Sam Gupta with ElevatIQ. How are we doing today, Sam? Thanks for joining me on my inaugural Kramer Talk.
I'm doing so great, and I'm so honored to join your show. I mean, this is a great start. Congratulations, Robert.
Thank you, sir. It's been a great road with my history with ERP. I've been in the business for about 30 years and working for different companies and became an analyst, and now I'm on my own, but focused on ERP and supply chain and data and security. And of course, in front of all that is AI. But what's nice is to meet other people like yourself who understand ERP because it is complex. And most of the companies that are running it feel it's the brain of the organization. And many analysts and fellow people in the field may not understand the complexity of it because it is so massive and it runs every facet of the business. But how did you get into it? And tell me a little bit about yourself prior to ElevatIQ.
Yeah, so I would not claim that I understand ERP. I plan to get there one of these days when I grow up. So far, I am not there. But how did I get into this? Okay, so this has been my life so far. I have not been in the business as long as you have been, I guess. So 20 years in the ERP space. This is the only thing I have done in my entire life and career. So I started as, very large consulting firms, system integrators. So I come from very deep implementation background. And then slowly and gradually, I did a lot of different, just consulting all over the map, I guess. And then finally started ElevatIQ, which is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. So the focus here is really the technology, strategy, change management, slightly different than just implementation. This is the strategy piece. And that's exactly what I have been doing. So I don't know, how did I get into this? I did not plan. I would not plan to get into this, but yeah, here I am.
Well, it's kind of funny because I went to graduate school and I worked for my father, who actually had an ERP company for chemical distributors and manufacturers. And he had it for a while. And they wrote the program for the chemical industry because they wanted to choose the most complex industry or one of the more complex ones.
Yeah.
Because they needed the help because of regulations, because of the unit of measures, because of all the things that the chemical manufacturers do. And it worked for discrete and process. But I told him I never wanted to work for him because I wanted to do my own thing. And I came back crawling on my knees. I'm like, hey, I think I'm ready. I was 23. So that was a long time ago. But I learned it at the ground level where you had to understand it to actually be effective, like yourself. And you had to understand implementations and what that meant to the customers that you were working for. So I learned it like you learn chess. It's a hard way to go. But when you get it, you understand the math equations of ERP. So it really hasn't changed. And I think we're in what I call now an evolution of ERP, where it's going through some transformations of where it was in the past and where it's going now. And the terminology modernization is thrown out a lot. And everybody's like, well, I want to modernize and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Do you think that's more marketing, or is it a real term, or a little of both? Because it feels like there is change in the air. And I do feel like ERP is the big elephant in the room sometimes, where companies or companies and vendors and analysts, they don't really look at ERP as this major component or industry, but it really is. So with that, do you feel that, what do you feel about ERP as that big elephant, and what do you think about modernization?
Yeah, so that's a great analogy. I really like chess. Okay, not to play, I'm not good at it, so I'm not going to tell you that, right? But here, it's not going to be just chess. Okay, there are going to be more variables. So either the play is changing every single minute, or the player is changing every single minute, or the rules are changing every single minute, or you are going to be at gunpoint. Okay, that's how ERP implementations are. So chess plus everything else that comes with it. I like to describe this experience in one acronym, which is going to be FAST. Okay, ERP implementations are fast, and FAST stands for fear, anxiety, stress, and turbulence. Okay, it's definitely not supposed to be your features and functions and change and this and that, customers and vendors. Obviously, you have a lot of marketing noise in the market, and everybody's trying to figure out, how to market this stuff. But at the same time, when you are dealing with fear, anxiety, stress, and turbulence, nothing else matters. Okay, the only thing matters is people. Okay, and people is the foundation of any ERP implementation. And how do you deal with this? Okay, so you are dealing with science. Obviously, you have the strategy piece. You have the science. You need to know your game, but you are also dealing with decisions, and those decisions can be horrendous. If you don't know how to make them. In 90% of the cases, when you are led by fear, okay, you go to your fundamental belief, which means you make crazy decisions. I like to use the analogy of medicine. Okay, they don't let family members operate on the other family member, and there is a reason for that. Right? Why is that?
Good point.
Right? And that's exactly what ERP implementation is all about. I mean, it's all about fear, anxiety, stress, and turbulence.
Well, but there's a reason why, and I think you made some really good points. ERPs are meant to run a business, to make you more efficient, to be a system of record, to be now potentially a system of action, to touch all points of your business where they touch together in some way, where if you're shipping, you're billing, or you're producing, inventory is touching all those angles, AR, AP, but it's even got into the warehouse, to the maintenance, to QR codes and shipping labels with barcoding, and on and on and on and on and on. But we're going to a point where companies do not have their previous systems. They weren't maintaining them the way that they needed to be maintained to modernize today. Correct. And I think that's a pretty big gap there that we're not really talking about, because when they were a system of record, we just wanted everything in the system, so we had eyes on it. Right? Not a system of action, more a system of record. So with that, as companies are evaluating these ERPs because they want to modernize, and that's a big deal, what's the mistake that they're making when they choose a system? Because that customer side that you're very aware of, and I'm more on the vendor side, what do the vendors need to know that these customers' mistakes are? What do they need more from the vendors to make better decisions?
Yeah, so they make the same mistakes the way you are describing right now. Okay, what you are describing is the rational part of the equation, which means whatever makes sense. Okay, the reality is that ERPs don't make sense because they are led by perception. Okay, perception is the reality. It's not about what is inventory for vendor one or vendor two. It's about what is inventory for the customers. If they don't understand how to define an inventory, it doesn't matter what Harvard is teaching or Stanford is teaching. It doesn't matter. Okay. It is going to be the inventory the customer is deciding, and their 5 team members, the way they perceive. That's the art. That's not science. So art is where the major problem is. So how do you align these forces? And it's not going to be just one forces. You have a lot of different commercial forces. Okay. Everybody's trying to make a lot of noise. So how do you balance all of that? I don't know. I have not figured that out.
Well, there is a lot of noise. And when you talk a little bit about the data platforms, AI, automation, security, governance, I've talked to you about this in the past, that everything is coming to more of ahead, where it's about the platform and the ecosystems. Where do you think that's all going? Because, I think the customers want that simple button, like we talked about. How do you get it to the point where they have more of a single source of responsibility, where they have the main ERP vendor that's aligned with an ecosystem, where they have the technology that they need, and there's not all this enormous noise? But I mean, I guess also, what do you advise your customers to look for? And then where do you see the industries going? Because right now, I feel like we're in a gap mode where everything's not fully developed. So the customers, when they are modernizing, they're really not getting the end result, which they really need to fully transform, where they would get the ROI that they think they're going to get right now. That was kind of a longer question as well, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it's very interesting because, when you look at what customers want, right? Do they really know what they want? Okay. If I look at my 4-year-old, he wants candy always, right? But then we tell them
I do
that,
too. I love it.
right?
That's the
I mean,
problem.
we do too, but at the same time, we at least know how many candies can we handle. My
Yeah.
4-year-old does not know. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the state the customers are in. Okay, they
Yeah.
don't necessarily understand what they need and how they can be successful. So now, how do you overcome that barrier? It's not going to be technology argument. It's going to be your perception. It's going to be the
Yeah.
mindset that you have, and how do you align? And again, the technical piece is easy. The psychological piece that you are going to have, and again, when you talk about systems being psychological, sometimes it doesn't make sense, and that's why I'm saying ERPs don't make sense. They are never going to make sense regardless of how advanced the technology is, because again, the psychological part that you have, that cannot be explained, that is very abstract, and that's what most people struggle with, and that's where the major problems are. So the question is not necessarily AI versus ERP versus data warehouse or security or whatever. Okay, the question is going to be, what is AI for you? What is ERP for you? Okay, what is CRM for you? Do you understand? Can you handle that? And that's where the major problems are. And Robert, I'm touching on a lot of things that you really like to talk about. I mean, technically, change management is supposed to be this, but the way people talk about change management in the community, they make it very formulaic, templated. That's not how change management is supposed to work.
No.
Because change management is very deep. It's deep into psychology, right? So
It's
that's
very deep.
yeah, so that's where the major problems are. And 90% of the people, they might feel that they are good at it, but you can sense.
Well, I think change management is not that we want to spend a lot of time on this, but it's undersold because they use it as just a topic, but it's really the crux of how you do an implementation. It's how you look at your organization, how you look at your processes, how you look at your the fear that you were talking about, the turbulence, the stress, the anxiety, because of the fact how you got to address all those. And it's the mindsets is with these individuals in the organization. You actually have to go out a couple years. Where do you want to be with your implementation? Work your way backwards, then and actually go back further than that, and then start addressing how you're going to implement an ERP, and then what processes you want to change, and then why you want to change them. Because usually a business, when they want to transform, it's like telling someone something to do something. You can't tell them to modernize. You want to modernize because it's going to enhance my business, because I'm going to be a better business. I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to be able to grow without adding more employees. But if you tell me to do it and I don't want to do it, why would I want to go through all that mud when I don't need to? My business is fine. And that's the pushback I feel that with the on-premise customers are having today. But thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so that's what looks good on paper. Okay, when you start executing, it's a very different experience, because again, the definition of modernization is going to be very different for every single customer, what they can handle, what they can digest. So that's where the real gap is. Obviously, that's the ideal process, but the challenge is going to be, okay, can the team handle, can team understand what modernization means? Are they going to be afraid of losing their jobs? If they are going to be afraid, that's not a good start of the ERP implementation. You never want to start an ERP implementation with fear in mind. Okay, so those are the barriers that you need to overcome first before you get into the real science and technology part. And all of what you are describing is obviously very logical. It makes sense. That's how you want to approach it, but that's not how the real world works.
Well, so with that, which is a good caveat to what mistakes are customers making in implementations the most? Is it a resource problem? Is it understanding of the nature of the execution of how deep it is? Also, do you advise customers to bring in temps to do the regular work and then the existing employees to actually do the implementation so that knowledge doesn't walk out the door? Where do you see the gaps, or is it just change management, process change, consumer behavior, or everything I just mentioned is the issues with these executions of implementation of ERPs?
Yeah, so I mean, it's never going to be just one factor. Okay, it's comedy of errors. Okay, that's how the ERP implementations are, and that's how they are going to be, regardless of whatever happens. How advanced we are. That's how the chemistry is supposed to work. So if you understand the chemistry, if you understand how these forces align and how these forces work together, okay, then there is a shot that you might be successful. But even then, it's very hard. Okay, so in my case, what do I advise? I don't advise anything, because advice advice very rarely land well on
Yeah.
people, especially if they are not receptive, if they are not open, if they have not seen something before. Then obviously that advice is not going to land very well. And
Yeah.
in 90% of the cases, the customers that are implementing ERP for the first time, they just don't understand. They
Mhm.
cannot believe in something they have never seen, touched, or feel. So how do you overcome that barrier is always going to be a challenge, in my personal experience, and that is our challenge. We work on change management, and that is your
Yeah.
favorite topic again. But this is the major challenge. I mean, there are no answers to these things. There is no
Yeah.
specific strategy that you can follow to overcome. I'm probably going to give you a resource right now, Robert. The best resource for this and the best book that I have ever read that makes sense. And I guess that is going to be Rumsfeld Rules. Is the name of the book. Okay. The background of Rumsfeld is obviously politics, but the book is not necessarily about politics. It's about how to navigate political structures, how to navigate people centric organizations, and how to lead large transformation initiatives. Okay, if you go
Yeah.
back
That'd
to
be
the
nice.
yeah
Well, so with that, you're saying that you feel that it's the personality of the organization that's causing the implementation problems, because
yeah
this is a major change for any company. And I think when it's sold that they're going to do it, do companies, are they excited that they're getting a shiny new red car? Are they nervous, or both, or something else?
they have no idea what they are getting into. They are completely blind. It's like deer in the headlight. Okay,
Yeah.
that's who they are. They take a lot of leap of faith because they have heard a lot of anxiety. Okay, and they
Yeah.
somehow want to commit to something because everybody has given them examples of how bad marriage is, but everybody gets married as well, right? So you want to get married now. We know how many marriages are successful. Some pretend that okay they are successful, some don't, right? Everybody is at a different maturity curve. But when you don't know that you are ready to get married, then what happens is that marriage becomes very ugly very soon, and you are not allowed to talk about it. Okay, you are supposed to smile,
We are.
right? But you do what you feel in your heart.
Yeah.
Okay, your actions are going to be driven by how you are feeling in your heart. So that's how most people are. And when you are working with those people, what they are feeling in their heart, whatever they are going to do is going to be the scientific outcome. And that's what we see in media and with the ERP implementation. That's why we have such an implementation failure rate, because people are not happy in their heart. People
Yeah.
are anxious, they are worried, they have so many different issues, I guess. So if you can figure out how to make them happy and comfortable, there is a very good chance. And that includes everybody. It's not just the
Yeah.
customer people. Okay, it has to
Yeah.
be vendors.
It's both. I
Yeah.
think sometimes the vendors need to understand what the customers need, and the customers need to understand where the innovation is going, because that gap is widening where the customers are, their capabilities to adapt and absorb this technology that has to keep on growing from the vendor's perspective, because it's there and there's competition. But at the same time, the customers need to understand their playbook. Like,
Yeah.
how do I get from my innovation aptitude to where the vendor's at? And maybe it's baby steps, but the customers also, they're buying these ERP transformation implementations because they want to grow their business, because the innovation needs to be used. And as we head that direction, we talk about event driven ERP and agentic AI and how this is changing. There's many benefits to a system of action that we're talking about here, because we'll talk about demand forecasting, supplier alignment. We're talking about inventory control that's way more sophisticated, cross-selling capabilities, production, suggestions, things of this nature. But it all tears back on, do you have your act together from your organization? Not necessarily from a data only, because data obviously has to be there, but your people need to understand what this new system is. And one of the biggest faults that I see is that customers are not shifting when we go from involving agents. What are the actual resources are going to do? And I think there's a worry there on the customer's end, but the worry is legit. But they need to be trained to be more strategic, to exercise some of this and some of this new regime of agentic AI, event driven. ERP. I think we're a few years away from that. But I think the vendors are selling it now to get the transformations to be a little bit expedited. And I think they're holding on because they don't see the ROI yet. Again, a pretty loaded question, but
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, technically, we are generations away if we can figure out in this lifetime, to be completely honest. Because, as they say, I mean, you cannot take horse to water, right?
Right.
And in this case, I mean, you are talking about many, many, many horses. Okay. You are talking about water, you are talking about horses, but you are not talking about that leap. That
Yeah.
leap is something it's very hard to teach.
Yeah.
That nobody can teach unless you have that figured out yourself. It is called drive. And drive is something
Well said.
very, 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 very hard to teach. And that drive is what drives the ERP implementation. So if they don't have the drive and if they don't have it in themselves, they are not going to get anywhere, regardless of whether we are talking about event-driven, AI, agentic, whatever technology that you are going to talk about. Technology is great, but at the same time, that leap is where the major problems are. And again, it's not about customer or vendors or whatever. Technologies are great. I mean, they're designed to do the transformation, and this has to be the understanding at both sides that okay, that leap is where the major problem is. So how can we manage that leap? How can we shorten that leap? And again, I mean, these things are really related to leadership, right? If you really think about it. If you choose the right leaders, if you choose the right people, then they'll figure out their own way out. They'll figure out the chemistry, and it's not going to be as hard. But at the same time, I mean, there's no way to teach these things unless they have that in themselves. That is part of their DNA.
Great answer. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Industry specific is not new, but it's being told that it's a little bit of a newer discussion topic and built in, AI is the agents are built into the layer of the specific industries, et cetera. I think industry specific has always been a topic and it's been needed. There's examples all throughout with compliance, regulations, sovereignty, even sustainability, unit of measures, how you bring it in bulk and break it down and into smaller unit of measures. That wasn't a standard feature in many industry products or just generic ERPs. Why is it such a big, and I understand that it's a big topic now and it should be, but what's your thoughts on, is it necessary to be a big topic? Because I do think so, but what are the dividends from that?
Yeah, I mean, all of these are great topics, depending upon what you are trying to accomplish, I guess, right? So let's talk about the industry-specific suites. There are pros and cons of each approaches. When you go to industry-specific suites, obviously they can reduce the implementation, time because they are going to have a lot more functionality baked as part of the suite. But at the same time, if you talk to any of the customers and vendors as well, and we see this in a lot of different deals, okay? And we go to these industry specific vendors and we tell them that, okay, this is the deal. This is what customer is trying to accomplish. Can you do this? And they are like, no, that's not going to work with us. And we are like, why? And they'll be like, you know what? I mean, you can't pick and choose. You have to replace everything that you are looking for. And that becomes a change management problem because, when you are trying to replace ERP itself is very big. And now if you are trying to replace their CAD, engineering system, their, what else do you have? FP&A, SNOP, that's a big change management lift. So which is a better answer? I don't know. Robert, maybe you can tell me.
I don't know either. I think it's a necessary evil because it runs your business. It makes the company more efficient. I think what I see is the biggest problem in ERP is not the vendors, it's the customers, the complexity of them. And I would recommend that they use as much of the systems as possible because they'll get more out of it and it will create opportunities for them to use the system to be a competitive advantage. I don't believe a lot of companies are headed in that direction as much as they should. I usually feel like companies are using about 50, 60% of the systems. And so to change to only have that same amount of use is probably not a positive change. So you want to go into it full mission to do this. And I think that's critical. Anyway, Sam, thanks for joining. I really appreciate your time. We'll look forward to talk to you on many different occasions. Sam Gupta, Robert Kramer, KramerTALK. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll look forward to see you next time.
Thanks, Robert.